Today's another day to find you shying away. I'll be coming for you, love, okay?
The ending of The Last of Us Part 2 had the unenviable task of not only following up what is generally considered to be one of the best video game endings of all time, but simultaneously capping off its own separate story of Ellie's revenge odyssey across Seattle. Thankfully, Naughty Dog managed to achieve the impossible. The curtain close of The Last of Us Part 2 just felt right for its characters. The ending might not have been as ambiguous as that of the first game, but it still leaves some loose ends and unanswered questions. And that's where we step in, because today we're going to be delving into full spoiler territory as we lay out exactly what happened in The Last of Us 2 ending and try to work out what it all means. In case I need to say it again, this is going to be full spoilers, so if you haven't played the second game yet, turn away now. Are you gone? Good. If you've come here with a particular burning question, I've popped the ones we cover in the description box along with time codes, but if you're here for a breakdown of exactly what went down in those final moments and what they mean, then just stick around. The Last of Us Part 2 ending starts, in quintessential Naughty Dog fashion, with a false finish. Following a brutal confrontation with Abby in Seattle, Ellie returns home to begin her new life with Dina. And we flash forward 18 months later to find the pair raising baby JJ, named after Joel and Jesse, on a farmstead not too far from Jackson. Life seems to be good for Ellie until we discover that she's suffering from PTSD over Joel's murder, unable to find the closure that she believes will only come with Abby's death at her hands.
I don't even know where to begin.
Tommy's visit, in which he reveals a new lead on Abby and Lev's whereabouts, is all that's needed to break the peace. And Ellie ventures out to California to hunt her nemesis down, much to Dina's disapproval. Abby and Lev, meanwhile, have successfully managed to track down the reformed Fireflies in Santa Barbara, and are on their way to meet up with them only to be captured by a mercenary group of slavers known as the Rattlers. Months pass and Ellie arrives, eventually infiltrating Rattler HQ. Upon finding both Abby and Lev strung up for an escape attempt, Ellie considers helping them make a break for it, but ends up forcing Abby to fight for her life. Eventually, Ellie gets the upper hand and begins to drown Abby underwater, but another memory of Joel triggers one final act of mercy, and she lets her escape with Lev by boat. Ellie returns to Wyoming to find the farm empty aside from her studio of music and paintings. She picks up the guitar and recalls the memory that flashed before her eyes while she had Joel's killer in her clutches. On the night before his death, she had visited Joel's home, confronting him for continuing to interfere in her life long after she cut him out of it for discovering what really went down with the Fireflies all those years ago. But what does it all mean? Well, you can read the end of Ellie's story in a number of different ways, but here is our 2 cents. Throughout the game, players were led to believe that Ellie's final interaction with Joel before his death was one of confrontation, in which she publicly derides him for refusing to accept that their friendship is over. As far as we know at this point, Ellie never forgave Joel for his actions in the first game, which explains why she's so consumed by a need to exact revenge on Abby. Deep down, she's really angry at herself for not patching things up with the only father figure in her life before it was too late. On the contrary, that final all-important flashback scene on the porch reveals that Joel didn't die thinking that he'd lost Ellie forever. Instead, Ellie made a choice to begin the process of forgiving Joel, but Abby and the WLF robbed her of that opportunity, which suddenly gives us a much better understanding of our heroine's hatred towards them. Just as the hope for a restored relationship with Joel came back into her life, Abby snuffed it out with one unrepentant swing of a golf club. Which brings us back to present day, where Ellie has another difficult choice to make. That memory of Joel that appears as she's drowning Abby, it reminds her that she is capable of mercy, that she can honour her friend's memory by being better than him, that if she's able to forgive Joel for committing one of the most unforgivable acts in human history, then she can forgive the woman who killed him. Ellie's last act of clemency thus breaks the cycle of violence that Naughty Dog has stated runs at the heart of The Last of Us 2. Having made that decision, bringing meaning to Joel's death through mercy rather than violence, she's finally able to move on from this sorry chapter of her life. To me, that final shot of her walking out across the fields is exactly that, Ellie moving on. It's fair to say that The Last of Us 2 rolls credits with a more resolute ending than the sinister ambiguity left by the close of the first game, but there's still a few niggling questions you might have that we will try to address now. Who are the Rattlers?
He's got a gun! Damn it.
Shit.
After going to great lengths to characterise and carefully colour in the backstories of The Last of Us Part 2's main warring factions, the Seraphites and the WLF, it seems odd for the game to introduce a third group at the last minute, present for just a few hours before the credits roll. Instead, the Rattlers are there as a mechanical antagonist for Naughty Dog's final act, though a couple of lines of dialogue and collectible artefacts do offer more insight about the history of this brutal group from the Golden Coast. Based out of Santa Barbara, the Rattlers are a mercenary force who capture wandering survivors and enslave them as human labour. Any who try to escape or exercise any form of resistance are punished brutally, either shot down, turned into infected to be used as living scarecrows, or hung up to dry on pillars by the coast. Even by apocalypse standards, the Rattlers are probably the nastiest group of the bunch, evidenced by the fact that they're willing to string up Lev, a 13-year-old, as punishment for Abby's escape attempt. Basically, these guys are the epitome of evil, and players can feel far less guilty gunning them down than members of the WLF or the Seraphites, who at least show some elements of empathy in their own tribal politics. Fun fact though, the larger Rattler, who Ellie shoots down after being captured, is played by Travis Willingham, the husband of Laura Bailey, who plays Abby. It really is a family production after all. What happened to Abby and Lev? Following Ellie's act of mercy, Abby is able to escape the Rattlers' clutches with Lev by boat, after the pair were left for dead on the pillars of Santa Barbara's coast. Though neither of them are in good shape, it's likely that Abby still intends to group up with the Firefly she managed to contact over the radio just before they were captured. Just take a look at the main menu screen once you've completed the game. That isn't just any old coastline, but one which appears to belong to the island of San Catalina, evidenced most notably by the site of the famous Catalina Casino in the background. This is where the Firefly on the radio told Abby that the reformed group were now based, and the image of a beach boat in the foreground suggests that she and Lev actually managed to make it there after all. It wouldn't surprise us if we could expect a Lost Legacy-style standalone expansion depicting the further adventures of this unlikely pair, especially given how much time Naughty Dog has invested into developing these characters, not to mention the fact that the Firefly's unexpected re-emergence now offers new hope for a potential vaccine. Similarly, it's not clear whether Yara actually killed WLF leader Isaac back on the Seraphites Island, and there's every chance he's alive and harbouring a deep grudge against Abby for her betrayal. If that's the case, Abby's history could still come back to bite her yet. Where is Dina? When Ellie returns to her farm in the final scene, Dina and JJ are nowhere to be found, with the entire homestead emptied apart from her studio, with not even a parting note to clarify where the pair have gone. We can make a fair assumption, however, that Dina made the decision to return to Jackson following Ellie's trip to California, as I doubt she wanted to raise a baby by herself in the apocalypse. The real question is whether Dina will be able to forgive Ellie after abandoning her for one last Hail Mary to hunt down Abby, and if Ellie is even capable of moving on from her traumatic events, despite finally letting go of her bloodlust. Whatever the case, the final shot of Ellie heading out from the farm also suggests she's heading back to Jackson too, hopefully to live the rest of her life in peace, and with a new quest to make amends with her soulmate. Is this really the last of The Last of Us? That's a tongue twister. No, the good news is that Naughty Dog has already confirmed a new Last of Us multiplayer experience. An evolution of the first game's Factions mode is in the works, so ambitious that the studio's original plans to release it alongside Part 2 had to be scrapped. We're not sure of a timeline for that project, but given the PS5 is out later this year, you can likely expect it to be a cross-gen release. As for new single-player stories set in the world of The Last of Us, I think it's fair to say that Joel and Ellie's story is over. But, as explained earlier, Naughty Dog has very much left the door open for the continued adventures of Abby and Lev. Alternatively, Ellie's diary reveals that she travelled through an infested Las Vegas on the way to California, and barely survived. Her entire journey to Santa Barbara, in fact, marks a months-long journey that The Last of Us 2 jumps over, as though it were nothing more than a short hike, making it the perfect gap in the campaign to return with a new story-based DLC. There's also the worrying notion that the cycle of violence isn't broken after all, as the remaining members of the WLF could return to Jackson to bring Ellie to justice for killing dozens of their soldiers. That is, of course, if the war between the Seraphites and the Wolves has left any survivors. As you can probably tell by now, there's ample opportunity for Naughty Dog to return to the world of The Last of Us if it wants to, either through an addendum-style DLC or even a full sequel/prequel on PS5. We'd welcome it too, as if Part 2 has proven anything, is that there's plenty more story to tell in this American apocalypse yet.
We should keep moving.